You don't survive the underworld by cracking jokes. So, when the head of the Marchetti syndicate hired a quiet woman in a faded denim jacket to be his personal shadow, every single one of his men laughed. They figured she was a punchline, a human shield made of glass, a joke meant to insult his paranoid captains. They stopped laughing the night 6 armed hitmen walked into a private suite at the Aldridge Hotel, and only she walked out. She wasn't a punchline, she was the executioner. Rico Marchetti hated Thursdays. Thursdays were for accounting, and accounting in a criminal enterprise mostly meant sitting in a windowless room breathing recycled cigar smoke while thick-necked men lied about why their envelopes were light. But today was worse than a normal Thursday. Today he also had to replace Bruno. Bruno had been Rico's personal shadow for 5 years, 6'4", built like a brick wall and completely free of any independent thought. Exactly what a crime boss needs in a bodyguard. Unfortunately, Bruno had stepped out of Rico's armored Lincoln on Tuesday morning and caught 3 ounces of high-velocity lead in the chest. Rico survived only because Bruno's massive frame jammed the car door shut as he fell. Now Rico sat in the back office of the high-end meatpacking plant he used as a front, nursing a headache that felt like a thunderstorm behind his right eye. His underboss, a walking ulcer named Sal, was parading replacements through the heavy steel door. "Next!" Sal barked, rubbing a hand over his balding head. The door creaked open, and Rico didn't look up from the ledger. He waited for the heavy thud of combat boots, the cloud of cheap cologne that always came with these meatheads. Instead, he heard the soft, almost silent squeak of worn rubber soles on concrete. He raised his eyes. Standing in the doorway was a woman, maybe 5'6", drowning in an oversized surplus field jacket that had seen better decades, her hair yanked back into a severe, messy knot. She didn't carry herself with the puffed-up chest of a street thug. She just stood there, perfectly still, hands resting easy in her pockets. She looked tired, bone-deep, soul-scraping tired. "What's this?" Rico asked, his voice a low, gravelly scrape. Sal blinked, looking at his clipboard, then at her. The agency sent a list. She was in the waiting room with the others. Figured she was a clerical applicant who got lost." "I'm not lost," the woman said, her voice flat, without inflection. Not defensive, just a statement of fact. "The sign outside said walk-ins for security logistics. I need a job." Rico leaned back, the leather chair groaning. He studied her. No makeup. Dark circles under strange, muddy hazel eyes. She looked at him not as the feared boss of the city's biggest syndicate, but the way you'd look at a delayed train. An inconvenience. "Security logistics," Rico repeated, testing it. "Do you know who I am?" "You're the guy with the empty chair in the hallway with a blood stain on the upholstery," she said. "Which means your last guy didn't do his job, and now you need a new one." Sal scoffed, stepping forward, his face flushing dull red. "Listen here, sweetheart. This ain't a mall cop gig. You take one wrong turn with us, you end up in a landfill. Go home." The woman didn't even look at Sal. She kept her eyes on Rico. "My name's Quinn. I don't drink. I don't sleep much. I don't ask questions. And I need the money." Rico should have told Sal to throw her out. The Marchetti family was in a slow-burn turf war with the Vargas brothers. Car bombs were replacing handshakes, and paranoia was the currency of the week. He needed a wall of muscle, a monster to stand behind his chair and make people think twice before reaching into their coats. But looking at the endless line of identical, brainless gorillas waiting outside, a strange, cynical humor washed over him. The Vargases expected him to hire a mercenary. His own men expected him to hire a tank. He was sick of the posturing, sick of the predictable chess moves of this life. "Give her the job," Rico said. Sal froze. "Boss, come on, you're joking. The Vargases are taking shots at you in broad daylight. She weighs 130 pounds soaking wet." "Give her Bruno's gun and Bruno's schedule," Rico said, standing and grabbing his coat. He walked past Quinn, pausing for a fraction of a second to catch the scent of stale coffee and rain on her jacket. "You drive, Quinn?" "I drive." "Good. My car's out back. Try not to get me killed. It ruins my week." He walked out, leaving Sal staring open-mouthed at the small woman in the center of the office. It was a joke, a middle finger to the Vargases and a test of his own untouchability. Let them watch him walk around with a waif. Let them wonder if he'd lost his mind or if he was just that confident. He didn't expect her to last a week. 3 weeks later, the joke was wearing thin, mostly because Quinn refused to act like one. She didn't try to prove herself. She didn't buy a suit. She traded the field jacket for a plain black peacoat, and that was the extent of her assimilation into the family. She was simply a ghost haunting Rico's periphery. In the car, she didn't speak unless spoken to. In dimly lit restaurant booths where Rico dealt in extortion, bribery, and occasionally blood, she stood in the corner. She didn't flinch when voices rose. She didn't look away when Rico casually broke a man's nose with a heavy glass ashtray over a gambling debt. And Rico watched her watching him. Most people, even hardened criminals, had a tell when violence erupted. A flicker of disgust, a twitch of fear, a tightened jaw. Quinn had nothing. She watched a man bleed on a Persian rug with the same detached interest as someone watching paint dry. It was unnerving. "You don't like blood, Quinn?" Rico asked one night. They were in the VIP section of a club he owned, the bass thumping through the floorboards. She stood by his booth, scanning the crowd. "I don't have an opinion on it, it's just plumbing." "Plumbing?" Rico mused, rolling a heavy glass of bourbon between his palms. "You know, Sal takes bets on when you're going to quit. Thinks the first time you see a real gunfight, you'll faint." Sal breathes through his mouth. Quinn replied evenly. "I wouldn't trust his cognitive deductions." Rico let out a short, barking laugh. The first time he'd laughed in months. The laugh was cut short by shattering glass. Across the VIP room, a high-stakes poker game had gone sour. One of Rico's mid-level earners, a jumpy kid named Russo, was screaming at a rival. The sudden, sharp shift in the room's atmosphere cut right through the music, the static of impending violence. Rico didn't move. This was his club. His men were supposed to handle it. Russo, high on something cheap and synthetic, kicked his chair back and reached into his jacket. It happened in the space of a single breath. Sal, near the bar, dropped his drink and fumbled for his weapon, moving like he was underwater. Rico braced for the deafening crack of a gunshot, but Quinn was already gone from his side. She didn't run. She flowed, slipping through the panicked, scattering bodies with frightening efficiency. By the time Russo had his snub-nosed revolver clear of the holster, Quinn was standing just behind his right shoulder. She didn't shout a warning. She didn't draw her own gun. She simply reached out, grabbed his wrist with her left hand, and drove the heel of her right palm sharply into the crook of his elbow. There was a dry, sickening snap, audible even over the bass. Russo didn't even get to scream before her hand swept up, gripped the back of his neck and slammed his face into the heavy oak poker table. The impact sounded like a dropped melon. The gun clattered to the floor. Russo slumped sideways, unconscious before he hit the carpet. The whole VIP section went dead silent. Quinn calmly bent, picked up the revolver by the trigger guard, and set it on the table. She didn't look at the terrified men staring at her, or at Sal, frozen with his gun half drawn. She walked back to Rico's booth, took her position by the pillar, and crossed her arms. Her breathing hadn't changed. Her hair wasn't out of place. Rico looked at the unconscious, bleeding man on the floor, then back at the woman in the cheap peacoat. "He was going to shoot the dealer," Quinn said quietly, answering the question he hadn't asked. Poor trigger discipline. Sweaty palms. Rico picked up his bourbon and took a long, burning swallow. And with sudden, icy clarity, he realized he hadn't hired a joke. He hadn't hired a bodyguard. He'd accidentally bought a weapon of mass destruction, and he had no idea where she came from. The invitation was a trap. Rico knew it. Sal knew it. The valet out front probably knew it. The Vargas brothers had called for a sit-down. Neutral ground. The penthouse suite of the Aldridge Hotel, a towering monument of glass and steel downtown. The premise was peace. The reality was a firing squad. "We don't go," Sal had argued an hour earlier, pacing. It's a kill box, boss. One elevator up. No fire escapes that aren't alarmed. We're fish in a barrel. If we don't go, we look weak, Rico replied, securing a Kevlar vest beneath his shirt. Heavy, uncomfortable, but it had saved his life twice before. Weakness breeds ambition, Sal. We go. 5 men. Tight. You taking her? Sal jerked a thumb toward the hallway where Quinn waited. She's my shadow. She goes where I go. Now, standing in the high-speed elevator rocketing toward the 42nd floor, the silence was suffocating. Rico in the center, Sal to his right, 3 of his best hitters behind them, and Quinn by the door panels, staring blankly at the changing floor numbers. The elevator chimed. Floor 42. The doors slid open. No greeting party. Just a long, opulent hallway lined with dark cherry wood and thick, sound-dampening carpet. At the far end, double mahogany doors stood slightly ajar. "Check the corners!" Sal hissed, drawing his weapon. The hitters fanned out. Rico walked slowly, hand on the grip of the 9mm tucked in his waistband. The air smelled wrong. Industrial carpet cleaner trying to mask stale smoke and something else. Something metallic. Quinn walked slightly ahead, eyes darting over the ceiling vents, the light fixtures, the gap beneath the doors. Sal pushed the right door open with his gun barrel. The room was massive, bathed in the orange glow of city lights bleeding through the windows. A long glass dining table sat in the center, and at the head of it sat Paulie Vargas, dead. His head resting in a pool of drying blood on the glass. The peace offering hadn't been a trap set by the Vargases. It was a trap for both families, set by someone else. "Boss!" Sal started, taking a step back. Thwip. A tiny sound. A suppressed gunshot. The hitter to Rico's left folded in half, a neat hole in his throat, and went down hard, blood spraying the wallpaper. "Ambush!" Sal roared, firing blindly into the shadows. Chaos erupted. More suppressed fire rained down from the mezzanine overlooking the room. Glass shattered. The 2 surviving hitters pinned themselves behind a leather sofa, returning deafening, unsuppressed bursts that chewed through the drywall. Rico dove behind a marble pillar as bullets stitched across the plaster where his head had been. He checked his magazine, heart hammering. He was pinned. Sal was bleeding from a graze, trapped behind an overturned credenza. At least 6 shooters. High ground. Crossfire, they were dead. It was over. And then Rico saw Quinn. She hadn't taken cover with them. When the first shot rang out, she'd moved laterally, vanishing into the shadows near the kitchen. He risked a glance around the pillar. 2 heavily armed men in black tactical gear were advancing on the left flank, moving to outflank Sal. Before Rico could line up a shot, a shadow peeled off the wall behind them. Quinn didn't shoot. She moved silently, closing the distance with terrifying speed, grabbing a heavy cast-iron fireplace poker from the hearth as she passed. She swung it once. It connected with the back of the first man's knee, and the joint buckled with a sickening crunch. As he dropped, she used the momentum to drive the iron point upward under the edge of his helmet, into his jaw. He fell like a stone. The second man turned, raising his rifle. Quinn was already inside his guard. She grabbed the hot barrel, redirecting it upward as it fired a burst into the ceiling, drove her knee into his groin, stepped on his instep to pin him, and slammed the poker against his temple. 2 down. 4 seconds. She dropped the poker, snatched up the fallen rifle, and rolled over the kitchen counter as the shooters on the mezzanine redirected their fire toward her. The marble shredded under a hail of bullets, filling the air with a choking white cloud. "Covering fire!" Rico yelled, stepping out and firing 3 shots at the mezzanine. Sal and the surviving hitters joined in, forcing the shooters to duck. It was all the window Quinn needed. She vaulted the counter, moving through the blinding dust like a wraith, every step calculated, and reached the base of the spiral staircase. A shooter leaned over the railing to get an angle. Quinn didn't raise the rifle to her shoulder. She fired from the hip, a tight, controlled 3-round burst. The man jerked back, crashed through the glass railing and fell 20 feet, his neck snapping on impact. 3 down. Rico watched, paralyzed by the brutal efficiency of it. He'd seen violence his whole life, ordered it, committed it. But this was different. This wasn't anger or a turf war. This was an exterminator clearing a pest infestation. Quinn bounded up the stairs 2 at a time. Gunfire erupted on the mezzanine. A man screamed, a heavy thud, then silence. Thick and heavy, broken only by Sal's ragged breathing and the distant wail of sirens down on the street. Rico slowly stood, gun still raised. "Quinn," he called, his voice hollow. A moment later she appeared at the top of the stairs, covered in white dust, a splash of bright red blood across her pale cheek that clearly wasn't hers. She held a combat knife in one hand and a stolen sidearm in the other. She walked down, stepping over the shattered glass and the bodies without looking at them, crossed to Rico, and stopped. She checked her cheap plastic wristwatch, wiping blood off the face with her thumb. "Police response time in this district is roughly 7 minutes, she said, her breathing only slightly elevated. "I suggest the service elevator." Rico just stared, at the blood on her face, at the mountain of dead, heavily armed men. "Who the hell are you?" he whispered. Quinn looked at him, those muddy hazel eyes devoid of warmth or fear or humanity. "I'm your logistics coordinator. We should go." The service elevator smelled like industrial bleach and old grease, grinding down 42 floors with a mechanical groan. No one spoke. Sal leaned against the steel wall, a wad of cocktail napkins pressed to his bleeding bicep. The surviving hitter, a kid named Carlo, dry-heaved quietly in the corner, gun hanging from 2 fingers. Rico watched the floor indicator tick down as the adrenaline drained out of him, leaving cold, hollow exhaustion. He looked at Quinn. She was methodically ejecting the magazine from the stolen sidearm, checking rounds, slamming it home. "Who set it up?" Rico asked, his voice raw. The men upstairs were using suppressed FN-57s, armor-piercing, high-end optics, no identifying patches, but their boots were uniformly laced in a straight bar pattern. Military or ex-military PMC. That wasn't a mob hit, that was a corporate liquidation. Sal scoffed, wincing. "Corporate? The Vargases set us up. Suicide play." "Paulie Vargas was dead before we walked in," Quinn said calmly, turning her dead-eyed stare on him. "Blood coagulation suggests at least 20 minutes prior. They used him as bait. They used you as bait. Someone's wiping the board." The elevator jolted to a halt in the underground loading dock. The doors parted, and the damp air of the garage hit them. "My car's parked 3 blocks east," Quinn said, stepping out. "The Lincoln out front is likely wired with explosives, or at least being watched by a sniper team. We walk." "I'm not walking anywhere with you," Sal spat, raising his good arm, hand shaking, pointing at her. "Boss, look at her. Look at what she just did. You think a temp agency sent that? She's a plant. She's the one who let them in." Rico looked at Sal, then at Quinn. Sal was terrified. A rat backed into a corner. Quinn was perfectly still, watching him the way a predator watches a wounded animal decide which way to limp. "If I wanted you dead, Sal," she said, her voice dropping an octave, "I wouldn't have used a tactical team. I'd have let you bleed out in the hallway upstairs. Put your hand down before I break your other arm." Sal flinched, pulling his arm back. "Enough," Rico snapped, stepping between them, feeling the crushing weight settle on his shoulders. A king without a castle, standing in a dirty loading dock. "We take our car. We go to the yard." The yard was an abandoned impound lot on the industrial edge of the city, a relic from his father's era, ringed with razor wire and guarded by 3 very large, very hungry Rottweilers. Inside the rusted steel office was a cot, a safe, and a burner phone. The drive was agonizing. Quinn drove a beat-up Honda Civic that smelled faintly of pine and damp earth, precisely at the speed limit, checking her mirrors every 4 seconds. Rico watched the city lights blur past. His empire felt suddenly, terribly fragile. Men in tailored suits arguing over garbage contracts and union dues were no match for ghosts in tactical gear dropping through skylights. When they reached the yard, it was pouring rain. The dogs recognized Rico and stayed quiet. Sal and Carlo went to the back room to patch up. Rico stayed in the main office, pulling a bottle of cheap whiskey from a filing cabinet. He poured 2 glasses and slid one across the scarred metal desk. Quinn stood by the window, peering through a crack in the blinds at the flooded street. "I don't drink," she said. "Take it anyway." Rico downed his in one swallow. It burned, a harsh reminder he was still alive. "You killed 5 men tonight. 6, counting the guy off the balcony." "6," she confirmed quietly. "Where'd you learn to move like that?" Quinn let the blind snap shut and turned. The flickering bulb cast deep shadows under her eyes. "I was taught." "By who?" "People who are no longer breathing. A closed door. A vault." Rico could push, could demand answers as her boss, but he knew, looking at her, that authority meant nothing here. The hierarchy of the underworld was a fiction she simply chose to ignore. "They're going to come for me," Rico said, leaning on the desk. "Whoever they are, they took out Paulie Vargas. They tried to take out me. They want the city. I need to know if you're going to vanish into the rain, or if I'm paying you enough to stand between me and them." Quinn looked at him, and for the first time he saw a flicker of something human behind the muddy hazel. Not pity, recognition. "Your money's worthless right now, Rico," she said, using his first name, and it sent a strange jolt through his chest. "But I don't run, and I don't leave a job unfinished. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we hunt." Sleep was a luxury Rico couldn't afford. He lay on the lumpy cot for 3 hours, listening to the rain hammer the tin roof. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the hitter folding in half, the white marble dust, Quinn moving through the haze like an apex predator in tall grass. At 4 a.m., he gave up and walked back into the main office. Quinn sat in the same rolling chair, coat still on, a disassembled Glock 19 spread across a dirty rag on the desk, cleaning the barrel with a cotton swab and solvent, the sharp smell of it cutting through the mildew. "You don't sleep either," Rico noted. "Sleep is a vulnerability," she murmured, inspecting the firing pin. "I rest in brief cycles, 20 minutes. It's enough." Rico dragged up a folding chair across from her and watched her hands. Small, but covered in a map of pale, thin scars, burn marks on the knuckles, a jagged white line running up her left wrist. Hands that had been broken and put back together with rough stitching. "You're bleeding," she said suddenly, not looking up. Rico frowned, touched his neck. His fingers came away sticky. A shard of marble from the Aldridge must have clipped him. Before he could react, Quinn set down the firing pin, pulled a basic first aid kit from a canvas bag at her feet, walked around the desk, and stopped in front of him. "Sit still." Her closeness was jarring. She smelled like gunpowder, rain, and something inherently clean, like cold steel. She tore open an alcohol pad. "This'll sting." She pressed it to his neck. It burned like fire. Rico gritted his teeth. Quinn was close enough that he could see the slight unevenness of her breathing, a tiny crescent-shaped scar just below her left collarbone. She wasn't a machine. The realization hit him with strange weight. She was bleeding out her own ghosts, hiding them behind a wall of absolute apathy. "Why did you take this job, Quinn?" Rico asked softly, the distance between them down to inches. "You don't care about money. You said so yourself." Her hand paused. For a fraction of a second, her eyes met his. Too close. The cynical boss and the haunted killer in a vacuum. "Because sitting in a quiet room is too loud," she said, barely a whisper. "I need the noise, the static. Your world is very noisy." She taped a butterfly bandage over the cut, her fingers lingering a heartbeat on his skin, not a caress, a tactical read of his pulse. But it burned more than the alcohol. She stepped back abruptly, the wall slamming into place. "We have a problem." "Besides the private army trying to kill me?" "Yes, Sal." Rico's jaw tightened. "Sal's an idiot, but he's been with my family 20 years. He's loyal." "Loyalty is a shifting metric," Quinn said, sliding the magazine home with a sharp clack. "I checked the burner's call logs while you were pretending to sleep. Sal made 2 calls from the bathroom an hour ago. Encrypted, routed through an offshore server. A cold stone dropped into Rico's stomach. He's calling a doctor. His arm's infected. He was whispering, and he locked the door. Quinn looked at him. The team at the Aldridge knew our exact entry time. They knew the floor. They knew Paulie Vargas would be vulnerable. Someone gave them the itinerary. Only you, me, and Sal knew we were going tonight. Rico stared at the rusted desk. Sal, the man who taught him to shoot, the man who carried his father's casket. If you're wrong. I'm never wrong about survival geometry, Quinn cut in. He's scared. The new players terrified him. He sold you out to buy a seat at their table. A heavy silence. Rico knew she was right. The math worked. The hesitation in Sal's voice yesterday. The insistence the Aldridge was a trap, while still pushing Rico to walk in. Plausible deniability. Where is he? Rico asked, his voice dead. He took Carlo out to the perimeter 10 minutes ago. Said he wanted to check the dogs. Rico stood, pulled his 9mm, chambered around. I'll handle it. No. Quinn stepped in front of the door. He expects you to be emotional, to hesitate. I don't. He's my mess, my family. You're paying me to keep you alive, she said softly. Let me do my job, Rico. The rain had stopped, leaving a heavy fog clinging over the lot. The rusted husks of crushed cars loomed like gravestones in the pale dawn. Rico stepped out, boots crunching on wet gravel. Quinn, a shadow beside him, slipping between the blind spots of the floodlights. They found Sal near the chain-link fence at the back. The dogs paced nervously in their pens, whining. Carlo was nowhere to be seen. Sal was pacing, a burner pressed to his ear, injured arm hanging limp. I told you they survived, he hissed into the phone. The girl's a freak. You said your team could handle her. Now I'm stuck out here with him and she's watching my every move. You need to send the cleaners now, to the yard. Rico stepped out from behind a stack of rusted containers. You don't need to yell, Sal. Sal spun, dropping the phone into a muddy puddle, his eyes going wide, darting from Rico to the darkness. He saw Quinn step from the shadows, gun drawn, aimed at his chest. Boss! He stammered, raising his hands. Boss, wait, it's not what it looks like. I was trying to buy us time, negotiate. Where's Carlo? Rico asked, the emptiness in his own voice scaring him. Sal swallowed hard. He panicked. He ran. I swear to God, Rico, I was trying to save the family. Who are they? Rico asked, ignoring the lie. A syndicate out of Europe. Guy named Holt runs the stateside operations. Sal blurted, sweating despite the cold. Limitless money, Rico. Mercenaries, politicians. They told me they were wiping you and the Vargases out anyway. I just wanted to make sure someone from our side survived to rebuild. You sold me for scrap. They're coming, Rico, right now. They tracked the phone. Panic finally broke him. He lunged for his own gun, clumsily pulling it with his good hand. He never cleared the holster. 2 suppressed shots coughed in the fog. Thip, thip. Sal's knees buckled. He looked down at the 2 dark holes blooming in his chest, looked at Rico, mouth opening and closing silently, and pitched forward into the mud. Rico didn't flinch. He looked at Quinn. Her gun was still raised. She hadn't blinked. You didn't let him pull it, Rico said quietly. I don't believe in fair fights, she replied, lowering the weapon. We have less than 3 minutes before Holt's cleaners arrive. The dogs are quiet. That means they're already dead. Snipers on the perimeter. As if on cue, a high-caliber round slammed into the container inches from Rico's head, showering him with rust and sparks, the boom echoing a second later. Move. Quinn grabbed his shoulder, yanking him behind a crushed school bus. The yard erupted. Floodlights shattered, plunging the lot into darkness. The staccato pop of suppressed submachine guns tore through the fog, chewing through the cars. How many? Rico shouted. At least 8. 2 sniper overwatch, Quinn calculated, terrifyingly calm. We can't outshoot them. We have to blind them. How? She looked at the rows of crushed cars. Gasoline. The soil here's soaked from years of leaking tanks. We need a spark. She didn't wait for approval. She broke cover, sprinting low across the open lane, bullets kicking up mud at her heels, and dove behind a rusted tow truck. Rico laid down, covering fire, aiming blindly at the muzzle flashes. A burning graze tore his shoulder. He ignored it. He wasn't a boss behind a desk anymore. He was a soldier in the dirt. Beneath the tow truck, Quinn pulled a flare from her deep coat pocket, looted from the safe house safe, and cracked it, the harsh red light throwing demonic shadows across her face. She tossed it not at the men but into a depression near a stack of old oil drums. The ground itself caught fire, years of accumulated fuel ignited in a massive rolling fireball, the shockwave knocking Rico off his feet, the flames leaping 30 feet, turning the fog into a blinding orange wall of heat and smoke. The sniper's thermal optics went instantly useless. The cleaners in the yard were caught in the inferno, screaming as the flames cut off their advance. Quinn appeared out of the smoke, grabbing his arm. Covered in soot, her eyes reflecting the fire. They ran. They scrambled over the chain-link fence at the rear, tearing their clothes on the razor wire, and dropped into the deep drainage ditch on the other side, moving blindly through the muck as the roar of the fire faded behind them. When they finally collapsed under the concrete arch of an overpass, miles off the grid, the sun was cracking the horizon. Rico lay on the cold concrete, gasping, staring up. His empire was ashes. His men were dead. His most trusted friend had betrayed him. He turned his head. Quinn sat against a pylon, knees drawn up, quietly reloading. Battered, bruised, utterly composed. She caught him looking. "We need a new car," she stated flatly. Rico started to laugh, a broken, cynical sound echoing under the bridge. He laughed until his ribs ached, until the exhaustion overtook the panic. He wasn't her boss anymore. He was just a ghost sitting next to a monster in the dark. And for the first time in his life, he felt completely safe. "Yeah," he breathed. "We'll get a new car." They didn't steal a sports car. They stole a 1998 Subaru Outback from a commuter lot behind a diner. It smelled of stale fries and wet dog, but it had a full tank and all-wheel drive. Quinn hot-wired it in under 40 seconds. They drove west for 3 hours, the burning wreckage of Rico's empire shrinking in the rearview. The adrenaline crash had left him shivering in his ruined, mud-caked suit, hollowed out. "We need supplies," Quinn said, the first words since the overpass. "I've got 3 grand in wet hundreds," Rico said, raspy, "and a bank account that'll flag my location the second I touch it. Keep the cash. We need off-grid logistics." She pulled into a decaying strip mall on the edge of a dying steel town, parked behind a 24-hour pharmacy. "Stay low." She returned 20 minutes later, tossing a plastic bag into his lap, rubbing alcohol, gauze, superglue, a cheap prepaid phone, 2 bottles of water. Then a rundown motel 2 blocks away, the neon sign buzzing with half its letters burned out. A place for people who didn't want to be found. Room 114 smelled of old cigarettes and mildew, a single queen bed with a faded floral spread. Quinn locked the deadbolt, drew the curtains, sealing them in gloom, then walked into the bathroom, flicked on the harsh light, and stripped off her coat. Rico heard the faucet, the rush of cold water, and walked to the doorway. Quinn stood over the sink in a gray undershirt. Her left arm was covered in blood, the sleeve torn, a deep, ugly laceration running from shoulder to bicep. She hadn't made a sound, hadn't even limped. She uncapped the alcohol and poured it directly over the wound, jaw locked, the muscles in her neck standing out like steel cables. But she didn't gasp. She just watched the blood and dirt wash down the drain. "You're hurt," Rico said. A stupid, obvious statement, but he didn't know how else to bridge the gap. "Shrapnel from the container in the yard." She picked up the superglue. "Let me," Rico said, stepping in. Quinn paused, looking at him through the mirror, those muddy hazel eyes guarded, calculating the risk. Then slowly she lowered the glue and stepped back. Rico washed his bruised, raw hands, took the alcohol pad, the gauze, the glue. He stood beside her, acutely aware of the cold, hard lines of her body, corded muscle and scar tissue. "Hold still," he murmured. He worked quietly, pinching the edges of the laceration together, running a bead of glue along the seam. A crude battlefield fix, but it stopped the bleeding. He wrapped it tight in gauze. "Thank you," she said. Flat, but the edge was gone. "You saved my life twice tonight. Pinning a bandage on you is the least I can do." He stepped back, leaning against the doorframe. "Who's Holt?" Quinn rolled her injured shoulder, testing the fix. "Holt isn't a mobster. He's a corporate liquidator for a private military syndicate. When a foreign cartel or a rogue government wants into a new territory, they don't send goons with baseball bats. They hire Holt. He buys off the politicians, assassinates the local heavyweights, and hands over a clean slate." A cold wave of realization washed over Rico. "And I was the local heavyweight. You and the Vargases. The syndicate wants the port, most lucrative shipping hub on the coast. Holt was paid to remove the obstacles." Quinn walked out and sat on the floor, back against the wall, gun on her knee. She never sat on beds. Beds were traps. "So I'm a ghost," Rico said, sitting heavily on the mattress. "My money's useless. My contacts are dead or on Holt's payroll. It's over." Over is a subjective term. I have nothing left. You have me, she said simply. Rico stared at her in the dim light. She wasn't offering comfort. She was stating a tactical asset. "Why?" he asked. "Your contract's null. You don't owe me anything. You could walk out that door and disappear. Why stay?" Quinn looked down at her scarred hands. For a long moment, the only sound was the buzzing neon outside. "Before I came to your office," she started, barely a rasp, "I worked for a man very much like Holt. I cleared boards. I removed obstacles. I didn't ask questions." She paused, swallowing. "Then I asked a question. And they killed everyone I ever knew. They burned my life to the ground to teach me a lesson." She looked up, the muddy hazel hardening into something sharp and terrifying. "Holt is part of that machine, and the machine hates friction. Tomorrow we stop running. We become the friction. They didn't plan an assassination. They planned an audit. Holt doesn't operate out of a warehouse or a social club," Quinn explained the next morning, tracing lines on a stolen municipal map spread across the carpet. "He runs a data center, a high-frequency trading shell company routing encrypted ledgers, a facility on the South Docks. Looks like a server farm, acts like a fortress." "If he's got a private army, we can't walk in the front door," Rico said. "We don't go through the door. We go through the ventilation. But first we need hardware. Your 9 and my Glock won't breach level 4 body armor. We need kinetic force." Rico knew a guy. Everyone in his position knew a guy. But this one wasn't a syndicate loyalist. An independent arms dealer working out of a rusted-out barge moored on the river. A paranoid old man named Yuri who dealt only in cash and didn't care about mob politics. They drove the Subaru to the riverfront under a gray, overcast sky. The transaction was swift, cold, and expensive. Rico handed over every wet 100 in his clip, and Yuri slid 2 heavy canvas duffels across the metal table. Inside, 2 FNP-90 submachine guns with armor-piercing ammo, a dozen fragmentation grenades, breaching charges, and 2 lightweight plate carriers. "You make war, Rico?" Yuri asked, gold teeth flashing. "No," Rico said, watching Quinn already inspecting the action of a P90 with terrifying familiarity. "We're doing pest control." By midnight, the rain had returned, a torrential downpour that turned the South Docks into a flooded maze of containers and concrete. The data center sat on a concrete pier, a brutalist block of windowless gray stone ringed by a 12-foot electrified fence, patrolled by men with assault rifles and Belgian Malinois. Rico and Quinn lay on the roof of an adjacent warehouse, rain soaking through their clothes. Rico peered through thermal binoculars. 4 exterior guards, overlapping patrols. The cameras are thermal. They'll see us the second we touch the fence. "They won't," Quinn said, linking a small weatherproof tablet to a radio jammer she'd built from scavenged electronics and Yuri's spare parts. Holt uses a centralized security network, efficient, but it has a single point of failure. The local nodes ping the main server every 60 seconds, flood it with packets and delay the ping, and the system reboots the optical sensors to clear the cache. Gives us an 8-second blind spot. Rico looked at her. You know how to hack a military-grade security grid. I know how to break things, she corrected. Ready? Rico tightened his plate carrier and racked the charging handle. He wasn't afraid. The fear had burned out in the impound lot. Now there was only cold, methodical anger. Do it! Quinn tapped the screen. Rebooting. 8 seconds. Go! They dropped from the roof onto the wet concrete, landing silently, and sprinted across the open ground, the rain masking their boots. 3 seconds. 4. They reached the fence. Quinn slapped a small strip of charge to the concrete base. 6 seconds. 7. Click. The cameras came back online, red lights flickering. But they were already pressed flat in the mud beneath the blind spot. A patrol guard rounded the corner, dog straining at the leash. The dog stopped, ears perking. It smelled them. It opened its mouth to bark. Quinn moved faster than the dog could react, slipping her suppressed pistol free and firing twice. Thip, thip. The dog went limp. The guard opened his mouth to shout, reaching for his radio. Rico stood smoothly, raised his P9-0, and fired a short, controlled burst. The armor-piercing rounds punched clean through the ceramic plate. The man dropped without a sound. Rico looked down at him, then at the gun in his hands. He'd ordered hundreds of hits in his life. He'd never felt the recoil of the weapon that carried them out. It felt heavy. It felt necessary. Breaching, Quinn whispered, triggering the charge on the fence base. It didn't explode. It cracked the concrete just enough to loosen the anchor bolts. She pulled the steel mesh back, creating a gap, and they slipped through into the shadow of the data center. The main server room's on the 3rd sublevel, Quinn said, consulting a schematic pulled from the dead guard's device. Holt will be there. Only room with a hardline connection to the offshore accounts. Once he realizes the perimeter's breached, he'll try a total asset transfer and wipe the drives. He doesn't get to walk away, Rico said, his voice hard. No, Quinn agreed, pressing a breaching charge against the steel-reinforced door to the service stairwell. He doesn't. The stairwell was bathed in harsh red emergency light, the breach having triggered the alarms, a deafening rhythmic siren pulsing through the concrete, an automated voice warning of hostile intrusion. Quinn didn't run. She flowed down the stairs, weapon up, eyes scanning the angles. Rico 3 steps behind, watching her 6, communicating only through sharp gestures. At the second landing, a steel door burst open. 3 cleaners poured in, rifles raised. Quinn dropped to one knee, making herself smaller, and squeezed the trigger. The P90 chattered, armor-piercing rounds shredding the men in the doorway. Rico stepped over her, laying down fire down the hall to keep reinforcements pinned. Clear, he shouted over the sirens. Quinn was already moving, stepping over the bodies, boots slipping on the blood-slick tiles. The 3rd sublevel was different. Freezing cold, heavily air-conditioned to keep the server banks from overheating. The roar of cooling fans swallowing the sirens. They stood before a set of reinforced glass doors. Beyond them, a cavernous room of towering black racks, blinking blue and green. And at the far end, behind a raised glass console, a man in a bespoke grey suit typed frantically. 4 armored guards ringed him. Holt, Rico breathed, recognizing the face from a dossier Sal had shown him weeks ago. He's transferring the funds, Quinn said, 90 seconds before the accounts lock and the drives wipe. How do we play it? She reached into her vest, pulled a fragmentation grenade, and thumbed out the pin, holding the spoon down. Loud. She kicked the glass doors open and threw the grenade high, arcing over the racks, landing perfectly among the 4 guards. Frag! One screamed. The explosion tore through the freezing air, shrapnel shredding the console glass and the server racks, sparks cascading like a waterfall. Before the smoke cleared, Quinn was inside, moving through the narrow aisles like a ghost. A guard, bleeding from the blast, stumbled into the aisle, raising his weapon. Quinn didn't shoot. She closed the distance, grabbed the barrel, drove the butt of her P90 up into his throat, then unholstered her sidearm and put two in his chest. Rico took the right flank. A guard popped out from behind a rack, firing blindly, bullets sparking off the metal inches from his face. Rico stepped out, squared his shoulders, fired a 3-round burst. The guard fell. The server room was a chaotic strobe of sparks, muzzle flashes, and steady blue blinking. Quinn reached the raised platform. The last 2 guards stepped in front of Holt, weapons trained on her. She didn't slow. She dove into a slide across the polished floor, firing her P90 one-handed, taking out the left guard's knee. He screamed, collapsing. She popped up seamlessly, tossed the empty gun aside, drew her combat knife in her left hand, and her pistol in her right. The last guard swung his rifle toward her. She batted the barrel away with the steel frame of her pistol and drove the knife up, finding the gap in his armor beneath the armpit, sank it to the hilt, twisted, pulled it free, and shoved him aside. Silence fell. Just the hum of the fans and the hiss of broken cooling pipes. Holt was backed against the shattered glass of his console, terrified, his suit covered in dust and blood, looking from his dead elite guards to the small woman in the black peacoat. Rico walked up the platform steps, weapon lowered, and stood beside her. Holt raised his hands. "Wait, wait! Whatever they're paying you, I'll double it. I can wire 50 million into an untraceable account right now. Just let me hit enter." He reached for the keyboard. Quinn raised her pistol and shot him in the right hand. Holt shrieked, dropping to his knees, cradling his shattered fingers. "You don't understand," he gasped, crying. "The Syndicate. They'll hunt you to the ends of the earth. You can't stop the machine." Quinn looked down at him, her eyes empty, without triumph or vindication, just the cold reality of a completed job. "I don't want to stop the machine," she said softly. "I just want to break its teeth." She raised the gun and shot him once in the forehead. Holt collapsed, his head hitting the keyboard. The monitors flickered, a red error message flashing across the screen. The transfer had failed. Rico looked at the dead man. He felt the heavy weight of his old life lift off his shoulders, replaced by something new, terrifying and freeing. He looked at Quinn. She was already reloading, her face an unreadable mask. "So," Rico said, his voice echoing. "What now?" Quinn slid the magazine home. She looked around the ruined server room, then at him. "We need a new car." Rico smiled, a genuine, cynical, utterly exhausted smile. "I'll drive." They walked out of the freezing room together, stepping over the wreckage, 2 ghosts fading back into the static of a violent world. They didn't have an empire anymore, but they had something far more dangerous. They had each other. So there it is. Sometimes the deadliest person in the room is the one everybody wrote off, the quiet one in the corner in a cheap coat, the one nobody bothered to take seriously. And if this brutal ride kept you on the edge of your seat, do me a favor and smash that like button to let the algorithm know you crave the grit. Share this with someone who loves a story where the quiet ones turn out to be the most dangerous. And if you want more hard-hitting, human, no-cliché action like this, subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss a chapter. Drop a comment below. Who would you hire as your shadow? Stay sharp, and I'll see you in the next one.